Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Reset Podcast. I'm your host, Laura Munoz, CEO of the experience agency D Flash. Each week, I bring on a different business leader who's doing some game-changing work. And especially when it's really unusual time of COVID, it's fascinating to get a chance to talk to some folks we wouldn't normally get a chance to talk to. And I am beyond excited to have Phelon, who's CEO of Growth Warriors. And not only is she CEO of Growth Warriors, she's a serial Silicon Valley tech CEO who successfully exited multiple companies. And she happens to be a Black woman, which, is not just a rarity, but it's an amazing thing to find. And she has an incredible story. So I guarantee you will learn a lot. So take a listen. Hey, Ross.
Hey there. How are you, Laura?
Oh, just hanging out in the middle of a pandemic, stuck inside.
Happy Monday.
Yeah, the usual. But even though we are stuck inside because of a heat wave and a global pandemic, the podcast does not change. And so the first question does not change. So promise, what was your first job?
Yeah, my first job, I would say my first formal job was probably in college, where I, put myself through college. I'm from Dallas, Texas originally. I put myself through college, and I used to house sit and walk dogs, and I realized I could make more money and be more fit if I ran them. And so I actually ran a dog running service when I was in college. And so I would say that was my first entrepreneurial endeavor. So back in college, that brings back some really incredible memories.
Wait, hold on a second. You literally ran a dog running service versus a dog walking service?
Yeah. Okay. So think about it this way. So two things. So there's the amount of time you spend. So walking one or two dogs at a time versus running with 10, right? So you can do more dogs. And at the time, I also realized that you could, people saw it as more valuable, right? If you're actually running their dogs and giving their dogs exercise versus just a simple walk. And so what's interesting about that is I actually learned when I was running that company, because it was exhausting, because every day you're probably running, 12 miles, right? Because you've got 4 different groups. But what I learned in that process was that, it's dangerous to sell your time for money. And so just after I started that, I did it for about 2 years. And then I realized, wow, it's not scalable to sell money for time. And I actually started a tech company while I was in college. And so that helped me not only, pay for college and sorority and all the things I wanted to do, but also funded me moving from Texas to California and going to grad school.
Oh, just randomly. You just happened to form a tech company while you were in college.
Necessity.
Necessity is the mother of invention. Okay.
Amen.
So how do we, so now you've got to explain the story. So how do we go from creating that very first company to starting a tech company in college, moving out to California to go to grad school, to being the amazing serial entrepreneur now? What was that journey?
Yeah, thank you. I feel like early in my career, it was desperation and necessity, right? And I think that's probably the same for you and a lot of other people. You don't have a ton of experience. You don't have a lot to offer companies. You have a bunch of great ideas and lots of energy, And so that was the sort of genesis for the company I started. And basically at the time, this is the late 90s, we were started out writing press releases for physicians. And then we realized, we can actually automate this using some form of data science. And so I won't go into the details, but we would use press releases that were picked up by the newswire, and we would use that data to inform and to infuse language into press releases that we would write to ensure they were picked up. And so it was a very simple tech, very focused niche. And I needed the money because, my parents didn't pay for me to go to college. I self-funded it. And SMU, where I went to undergrad, it was expensive, Lauren. So you could only get so many loans. You could only do so much work and run so many dogs. And I just realized, wow, I need something that I can do better than anyone else. And I can build a team. I can build technology that will make this more scalable. And so I did that. And then as I graduated and I was like, what do I do next? I knew that I wanted to be on the West Coast because, that is, for someone who grew up in Texas, that in my mind was like where all the interesting stuff was happening. And so I decided that I wanted to go to grad school and learn the underpinnings of business. And just before I decided to leave, which was like right after graduation, I met my mentor who became, one of the great champions of my life, a woman named Barbara Britton, who said, hey, when you come out and go to grad school in LA, you can stay with us and we'll put you up and I'll mentor you. And so Laura was like, why wouldn't I go? She was, I know she was a senior executive working at a big tech company in LA and a woman, and she was gay. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. I learned everything. And so I was going to grad school during the day, and at night I would do projects for her. And then between the beginning and end of my first year in grad school, she got a job at a company called BEA Systems, which was essentially pre-IPO booming technology company, web tech company. And so she said, hey, you're totally unqualified, but I want to support you. Do you want to come and do research? I know. I was like, I'm all in. Do you want to come and do, research for an analysis on acquisitions that we're doing? We're doing multiple acquisitions a quarter. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, oh, by the way, you'll also do this four other jobs I've got for you. And so, Laura, between the first and second year of grad school, I moved up to Silicon Valley and worked as an intern for BEA. And it was such an incredible experience. But what it taught me was the importance of mentorship, right? And that's one of the big reasons why I wrote the book that we'll talk about. And I started the companies because I really wanted to support, people who were coming up in their career, because I benefited so much from that in my relationship with Barbara and others.
So that sounds like a classic story that usually happens to a white guy. That almost never happens to a Black woman. Did you realize at the time that you were actually stepping into something really incredible, or are you just like, I'm just going to make this happen no matter what?
That's a great question. So first of all, I would say that I became aware of, so I grew up in a West Indian household, right? So you probably know West Indians, being in New yeah,
parents, Jamaican parents here. I know what you're say. I know exactly what you're going to say.
It's a different culture. Yeah. And so your family life, everyone has an entrepreneurial aspect of what they do. They all have side gigs. They're all hustlers. Mm-hmm. And so you grow up in this environment where you see challenges, but people are not that sensitive to it, So
whatever, you'll figure it out.
They're like, you're smart enough. That sounds like it's fun. Why don't you do that again? And so I grew up with a little bit of ignorance about it, like, hey, that's just the struggle. Oh, that happens to everyone. Talk to your uncle. He found a way around that. And so I didn't actually realize how challenged / blessed I was until I want to say it was when I met Bill Campbell, the late Bill Campbell, who was, the $1 trillion coach. And he told me that the path I had chosen in tech to be a tech CEO was going to take longer and be harder and potentially not have, the Sergey and the Zuckerberg explosion because of who I was. And I'll be honest, I don't think that I realized that I was in a different sort of game or in a different lane until he sat down and said, you are playing a very different game, young lady. And that's when it sort of struck me that, oh, it is different. It is more challenging. It is harder. And so I would say, to answer your question, I just thought this was how you did it for most of my life.
So it's funny. And
does that resonate for you? Does that resonate for you?
Not at all, promise. I don't know what you mean. Well, it's funny. Like I meant to say to you before when we were talking. I'm like, I was gonna ask you which Caribbean island is your family from. I'm like, that's the only way this would work. Because like I can't. And it's funny. It's funny, but it's not funny in a way, because like I immediately knew, reading up who you are. I'm like, oh, you're clearly Caribbean. Like, there's just no other way. And it's weird because, like, you know, there is this really unique way that we are brought up. It's just different. And, you know, I've tried many times to explain to a lot of my Black American friends. I'm like, yeah, we just grew up, it's just a different neck of the woods. It's not better or worse. It's just different. You know, and because of the islands that we're all from, like, you see entrepreneurship from the minute you're born,
right.
And it doesn't, and it's not that you don't see barriers, but you see people just figuring it out, and you don't know what you don't know. So you're like, all right, I'm just gonna dive into it. Like, similarly, I didn't know how to be in, you know, running my own company. I just sort of, I'll just start it and I'll figure it out. But yep, that's okay. And you know, here we are 10 years later, and unrelenting resilience to make sure that it is a strong and growing and thriving company. I'm like, yep, that's what we do. What's the issue here? And I think a lot of it I think it comes a lot from seeing that with your own families, and not taking no for an answer, and also not thinking that you shouldn't be in the room. It's like, of course I should be here. Why not? Like, duh. That's just
interesting.
That's just it.
Yeah,
it just is.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I would just elaborate on two things you said. So, first of all, you know, just to get into some of the history, like, you know, Jamaica, Trinidad, Tobago, these islands suffered a lot of terrible slavery, but it ended sooner. And there was also much more focus on entrepreneurship. And so people own land. And so families, I think, matured in their entrepreneurial journey, because when I would grow up and we would go to families in Queens, or we would go to different parts of Brooklyn and the Bronx, and I would visit my family on the East Coast, there's so much pride in that culture for the struggle. And so, I mean, I don't know I know a lot of Jamaicans, but Jamaicans work really hard, and there's so much pride, you know, there's a lot of pride in what someone did to help, and a lot of mentorship. And so I always had men and women in my family that I could reach out to get insight and perspective. And so I think that was a little bit different. I think the other point that is sort of, how do I say this, is unique is the role of sort of like entitlement. You know, my mother got her undergraduate degree the same year I did. She was a single mom of 3. She got her graduate degree the same year that I got mine. Again, you know, kind of coming up and creating that. But she always felt and expressed to me that I was entitled to be there. And I remember I had snuck into a board meeting at BEA, and Laura, I was probably 21, 22. Again, shouldn't have been there. And I called her and I was like, I'm in this meeting and they just broke for a break. And she said, where are you sitting? And I said, I'm sitting back with the admins, and I'm just taking notes and being quiet. And she said, do this. Take your chair and put it between the 2 most powerful people at the table. And then when they come to sit down, make sure that your hands are resting on the table, touch the table. And I was like, huh. And I remember like being nervous about it. And this executive meeting, which has got private equity guys, it's got bankers in this meeting, it's got the CEO of a, several $100 million company. My boss is like, how did you get in this room? And I'm sitting at this table with all these powerful people. And I just raised my chair. They all walked in, and I had my notes and my hands were crossed, and I was touching the table. And they just looked at me and just scooted and scooched, and the meeting went on. And that taught me that there has to be, on some level, a little bit of boldness when you want something that maybe you or other people don't believe you deserve. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know, exactly. I mean, similarly, my mother, had a nursing degree, because obviously every Jamaican woman has a nurse, and a nurse practitioner, surgical head nurse practitioner, math genius, can still sew with her eyes closed, anything from memory. And my dad, an engineer, and it was never a question of like, which college am I going to go into? It's like, which private university or Ivy League school are you going to go to? And it's going to be like, and you have your pick, and like, and I was like, okay. But also, I often make this joke with my friends about what Jamaicans say about, what the world, they don't understand what imposter syndrome is. And it's because it's like, well, we're raised to be the best. And not in like an obnoxious way, but like, there's nobody better than you. Like you get to see that very, very early on, that, yes, you will be different in some circumstances. You might be the only one. So what? If you're the only one, that means you're in the right room. And, that kind of drilling into your head as a kid, so that when I got into those rooms where I was the only one in the room, I was like, yep, I'm in the right room. Yep, that's where I should be. And I'm also not going to sit here and be quiet. I'll sit here and raise my hand when it makes good sense. I will listen. When it makes sense, I'm going to raise my hand and I'm going to say something smart, because I will pay attention. And I didn't act like he'd been there before. And like, no, there was no dress rehearsals and any of that stuff. And so that when you had your moment, run with it. But again, we saw that it wasn't something where it was totally foreign to you. And, whenever there is the actual quintessential study of like, Caribbean American kids in the US, because I don't think anyone's ever actually done it, you'll probably see a lot. The data behind it in terms of college degrees, master's degrees, elevation in corporate structures, I would fancy a guess it's going to be higher than probably American-born African Americans. Just again, because the experience is just different. Like everyone in your family probably owned a house, or if they didn't own a house, they were close to owning a house, or they all stayed in the same house together. It's like, even that whole thing about what does it mean to own a home, have a mortgage, you're seeing that, living in neighborhoods that are not 100% Black. All those different experiences, I think, play into the Caribbean experience, West Indian upbringing, that does turn around when you hit adulthood, and in a weird way prepare you for the universe you're going to walk into differently than others. And so it's something to be applauded, and not to say, oh, well, that's better. But no, it's just different. And okay, great. That's how you experience things. But then you have to also lift as you climb along the way. Like, you shouldn't like, oh, that was great for me, but I'm not going to help anybody else, because that's the kind of crappy part about it. Instead, how can you help others so that they can get to those rooms as well?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, and I love that nuance. And it's one of my really good friends is a guy named John Belizaire, and he's Haitian, and he's been massively successful. Actually, at BEA, we bought his company for like 150 million, and he was like 25. And he and I have had this discussion about the Caribbean. It's interesting, though, there were things that when I got to Silicon Valley, I didn't understand. I didn't understand the individual's ability to access capital. I didn't understand I didn't understand how important it was to have what I always call kind of anti-fragile relationships, like people who will ride or die and open doors and like hold them open for you. There were things like how to raise capital, how to set a business up so that it's valuable and scalable and it can be bought. Like it took a while because, again, I didn't grow up with people who were formally educated in these areas or had experience. I had the grit, to your point, and I had that desire and pull. It was the other things that were the other skills that are learnable. And that's the thing that, I find so interesting in this moment that we're in around Black Lives Matter, and what I think is happening kind of in Silicon Valley and in New York is where we're looking for more people who have diverse opinions and who bring this divergent thinking. But at the core of it, and tell me if this is getting too off, I think there's also a responsibility that when you show up in these environments and you're ready to play, and I'm using like a person of color or any kind of underdog, that you also know that there are other elements of the game that are not just tied to this inherent thing that you've absorbed from the people around you, but that there are specific skills around how money works, how markets work, the people who sit around you at the table, right? And also how wealth gets created. Wealth does not get created being, an employee, right? Wealth gets created by having a stake in owning. And so that was what I would say was the biggest lesson learned when I came to the Valley and I got more acclimated, which is the explosive potential of hard work, the explosive potential of relationships, and of being part of the money supply, if that makes sense. Like it's different than just working hard. It's now you're in a different stream. And so what I feel compelled to do is I've bought companies, I've sold companies, I've raised a lot of money, is I want other people to know grit is a blessing. So whatever you've been through in your life, God bless you. It's amazing. Harness that. And there are skills that are necessary to be at the right tables sustainably and to get the benefit of that.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing. It's like, because it knows you no good to be at those tables and then be on the menu versus actually be participating at that moment. And so I think it's a great segue because you now sold a couple companies, Miss Promise.
Yeah.
And raised a bunch of money.
Yes.
Do tell.
Yeah. And again, go back to that, desire. When I left DEA, we'd all made money, and I went and I started a services company that did voice of the customer. We turned that eventually into a tech company. We sold it. I had an incredible partner that is my business partner today, a gentleman named Stephen Nix. And I always say that, like, in the universe, you kind of need three people that are always with you. You need a mentor who is, helping you see things and they bring their wisdom into your experience. You need a partner who is a complement of your blind spots and who can amplify your hero qualities or, your superpowers. And then you need someone who's almost like an advocate, someone who can open doors for you and like has so much clout and so much respect that they just like open stuff for you and make things happen that are magical. And so it was during those years after I left DEA that I got those three people in my life. Barbara and I cemented our mentorship relationship. Stephen became my business partner and always just was someone who always was my ride or die and who was so supportive in everything I did. And then Bill Campbell became the advocate who would tell me things no one else would, who would also open doors. And so that moved into, building and creating a company, starting a startup, raising $5 or $6 million, putting my own money in, realizing how important that was. So I started a company in 2008 called Upmo. It was a career management technology. And so we built that. It was not massively successful. We ended up selling the intellectual property. I then moved on and realized that one of my strengths was raising money, understanding markets, driving revenue, and understanding customers. And so I went on to become what I would say that I kind of ended my CEO part of my career as is getting into turnarounds. And so the nature of a tech turnaround is, kind of similar to what we've all heard about. You come into a company at the board level, the board brings you in and you're a chief executive. I was CRO and COO and then CEO and in different companies. And you're brought in to kind of figure out how to transform the business and pivot it in a certain way. And often the team that's been there, it is not leading it at the pace or in the direction, right, that's wanted. And so my last company, which I joined in 2015 as CEO, is a company called Tap Influence, which I think we had a brush with each other somewhere in there. But I was brought in to do a business model turnaround. And then I did that. We went from a services company with like 30% gross margins to a tech company with, 80-90% gross margins. I raised about $14 million in venture and then some money in debt. And then we ended up selling the company in 2018 to a public company called IZEA, who was at the time our competitor. But going through that whole process, you learn so much about, not only running a business, but transforming it. And so I would say that in my career, that was one of the most challenging and fruitful, just professionally, that I've ever had. It was really a nice way to realize that, I can now help other people raise money, find the right team, quote unquote, and create exits and create value, scale.
Awesome. So just a moment to talk about the fact that it is rare to find a Black woman in Silicon Valley, step one. Step two, who's successfully raised millions of dollars, step two. Step three, who successfully exited multiple times raising millions of dollars. Do you ever sort of look back at that and go like, damn, I really did that? And give yourself the appropriate flowers that you should?
I'll send you my address and you can send me flowers. I like calla lilies and tulips. It's a good question. I think we all need to do more of that, and you too. Like we all, part of one of the things I think we miss is we often don't have time and inflection. I mean, COVID and having this time of self-reflection has been really heartening, because so much of this time has been spent inside and not on planes and not, the next thing, right? We all do this. I think you might be one of those people too, just a suspicion. But so the answer is no, I don't do it enough. But as I was writing this book, and it took me about 7 months to actually write the whole thing. It's actually coming out in August. But it was a point at which, Laura, I was just like, I got to sit down and reflect on who I've been and who I can't become what I want to become unless I really understand who I've been and what I've done. And so it was a cataloging of a career, and distilling what were the meaningful experiences. And, I'm a whole person, right? I was married and divorced in that career. I was, I went through challenges with investors and boards and building things and successes and trying to understand how to put that into context. So I think everyone should write a book, honestly, because it really allows and creates a space for, divine inflection and reflection. So
I love it. Yeah, I think, we don't nearly take as much time as we should to remark upon the work that we do, because again, oftentimes we're just doing the work, and you're like, we're doing the work. And, part of the reason I have the podcast is because I ask these questions because I get you to take a moment and be like, oh, wait, I have done some amazing stuff. When I remark upon where I started, like when you were the girl, running the dogs, I don't think you think about, oh, here I have a PE fund on just raised $14 million. Like that, it's a long way. that requires an applause and a big pat in the back.
Thank you.
Because here's the thing, like, you are kind of a unicorn. Like, that is a rarity to find. We keep we see the data of less than 1% of Black women who are able to raise $1 million. And, a white boy can sneeze on a napkin and raise 10. He'll raise 100 million if you went to Google for 5 minutes. And so to see you is necessary. I think it's very much to see it, be it, with regard to having other young people, Caribbean or not, see that you exist. And like, which I think, we were talking about when we first were chatting last week, is that, like, I think oftentimes the problem is that there's one or two people who get sort of the light shined on them. And there's so many more who are every day doing great work, but because they're not big on Instagram or they're not big on Twitter, that folks don't know about them. And so as a result, people don't know to, like, tap you on the shoulder and go, hey, are you on a board? Hey, should you be on this, like, startup competition where you're judging folks because you actually would have incredible advice? Like that kind of stuff, where it leads to more opportunities in this sort of next really awesome stage. And so, I'm so happy when we got introduced. I was like, my goodness, there's so much to talk about with you. Because I'm sure, like, along the way in your career, has there ever been a challenge where you've been like, there's no way I'm getting out of this, and then you found your way through?
All the time. Yeah, all the time. Yeah, and that's the thing is, this next generation of underdogs, and I consider in that people who didn't finish college, people of color, trans, gay, like I consider, like, anyone who's not non-traditional, right? So double negative there. That, yes, the things that make you an underdog are assets in this game. And there are also skills that are required to play it. And so what I feel is part of my next chapter is decoding that. I mean, look, Laura, like I've had board members yell at me. I've been locked out of rooms before. I've had, business partners steal equity. Like, all those things that happen to every normal day successful entrepreneurs have happened to me. And so what I want us as a culture, and I don't just mean people of color, I mean underdogs, is two things I want us to avoid. One is making up a story that because it's hard for us that we can't do it. Okay, that's one, because it's hard for everyone. Two, that there's some magical, mystical juice that exists that you can't acquire. And so I believe that, when you see Fortune magazine and you see Inc. and you see all these people that you can't relate to, they've just got the same grit as you and a set of skills that are learnable that you can acquire too. And so in everything I'm going to do for the next 50 to 100 years, because I plan on living a long time, mm-hmm. I want people who are like, when my grandmother came to the U.S. from Trinidad, like, I want people who were on that boat, I want someone to have my book or to have my knowledge or to watch a video and to know, okay, yes, I've got the grit. Awesome. Check. And I need to know how to self-manage. I need to know how to tell my story. I need to have relationships that are anti-fragile. I need to be able to build a dream team by having a clear leadership philosophy. I need to know my market. I need to understand how to analyze the size of this market and the fluidity of it and the velocity. I need to understand how to exit a company and how to build it from scratch to do that. And I need to know how to capitalize. And if I could just harness those 7 skills, I can take this grit and I can go into, Wall Street. I can go into, Silicon Alley, Flatirons, mountains, wherever, and I can make my dreams happen. And so that's the thing that wasn't there for you and me. We saw our grit as being what would carry us, and then we learned the rest. I want to build the skills that are replicable so that people can marry that with that grit. And I believe this is such a crazy, I think that underdogs are so much better prepared to win in meritocracies than other people, because we have that resilience and we have that ability to be like, oh man, I just fell down a flight of stairs. Okay, let me get up and do it again.
Right.
And I think you need that. Like, that's what you need. And people give successful people like, the quote unquote whiteboard club. Yes, it's more easy in some ways, but they work hard too. And so if we have the grit, we have that underdog spirit, and we have the skills, we will create a generation of entrepreneurs that maybe didn't go to college, maybe are trans, maybe are Latinx. Like, those people will crush in the next generation. And actually, Silicon Valley tech needs them because the companies that we're creating today are not reflective of the experience of the 8 billion plus people in this world. And so the opportunities in the next 50 to 100 years that I'm going to invest in companies I'm going to buy are going to be ones that are reflective of mass market opportunities that today we're not even touching. And so, Laura, I get on my high horse about this, but like, I'm excited. Like, there's nothing in me that is sad or forlorn or concerned. I'm amped. I believe that it's time, it's happening. People need the information. It's out there. I'm working on it through books and through buying companies and mentorship. You're doing it through this beautiful podcast. These are platforms. It's happening. Like, it's happening right now. So nothing in me has any concern. And I believe that you and I are the pioneers and the unicorns. So that means we have to teach and mentor. Mm-hmm. And that's what you're doing here. And so I love it. I love it.
Awesome. You just speak my language. When's the book coming out?
So it is coming out. My team says it's coming out August 31st. So the end of August, 2020, just in time for my birthday. So
wonderful. Yeah. So Virgo.
You know it.
I had a feeling. My brother's a Virgo, and I'm like, similar. But yeah, it's interesting because I think there is this universe around, okay, what do we do now? Oh my God, it's terrible. And my whole thing is that, like, I've had, as much as stressful as this time around being home for the pandemic has been stressful, and obviously my normal business went flipped upside down because you can't do live events if you're trapped inside. But I've also had a chance to sit down and work on all the projects I've been needing to work on, but I never had the time.
Right.
And so I think that's the one good blessing out of this time, is that you can actually do this same kind of planning. It's like why I also created my online course about connecting and networking, because the people who can help you get to that next level are out there, and they've never been more available for you to pick up the phone or send an email on LinkedIn and reach out to them and really build those relationships, so that when we are allowed back outside, you can go grab a cocktail and you'll have built this relationship with this person who could then be, someone who can help guide you in the rest of your career, or, be your advocate in the rooms when you're not there.
Amen.
And that's the thing I think is so key right now. But, it's interesting because I think, obviously it's still stressful. It's still worrisome. Obviously, people who look like you and me are more apt to get COVID, which is slightly concerning. No matter how many root we use, because us Caribbean people, this is always our root to save you. What are you doing for your self-care during this wackadoodle time that we're in to make sure that promise is in good shape?
What a great question. For my self-care. So, wow. So I'm up in the mountains in Northern California. So a lot of hikes. So did a lot of hikes this weekend. I am, taking the risk and getting massages as much as possible. But I would say the most, yes, I have to. I have been watching Spanish telenovelas and
awesome.
and awesome. Right, getting some Spanish tutoring, but the telenovelas have been outstanding. So just sort of getting rejiggering my Spanish. But you know what? A lot of it's just been the blessing of being able to get outdoors. I'm in a small town called South Lake Tahoe, and so I get to go for hikes, for walks. And there are not a lot of people here. So that's been, I would say, the biggest part of the self-care regime is just, fresh air and fresh water and being outdoors.
Awesome. Yeah. Listen, if I could figure out a way to get massages here in New York, I probably would. Because God knows I need one, because, oh my God, my back. so I'm right there with you. But yeah, I'm also in Manhattan. So, tall buildings are still my neighbors. And I keep saying I'm going to go on like a weekend away. And somehow every weekend I'm still in Manhattan. So I just follow your lead, promise, and just like escape and go to the mountains. Because it's necessary. Otherwise, God knows. Quick question for you. So if I'm a founder and I want to raise capital for the very first time, and I'm new to this game, what are like some first steps, tips that you would have to give to some folks? Because I think Italy Road is difficult, and we know that it is, but you've successfully done it multiple times. So I'd love to hear if you've got some advice on that.
So, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, so the process is, I would say the two things that jump to mind, Laura. So one is, don't expect it to be like your first meeting is going to result in, $500,000, right? So that's number one. Is it is a journey, and you're also using that process to learn about your business and learn about yourself and learn about the things about your business which may not be, advantageous for the business. And that feedback often comes from meeting with investors. So let's say that you are, you have this great idea and, you've built a pitch, you have a little team, or you have a prototype, or you've got some early traction. As you're meeting with people, obviously realize that all feedback is useful and constructive. But before that, I would say that the one thing that, was a learning experience that I got from a guy named John Hagedorn, who was the former CFO at Intel, and he was an advisor of mine, is make sure that you're going into a market that's big enough to support a couple of multi-billion-dollar companies. And that's the thing that I think people miss is, I'll look at deals and people will say, well, I've got this great idea, this great product, and they haven't really nailed the market. And so in the book, I actually talk about how to size markets, how to identify your ideal customer, how to understand the unit economics for that customer, and if those are appealing and if it's scalable. You look at markets like, Uber and the whole, delivery market for food. And these are markets that have, tens of billions of dollars of opportunity, right? And they move fast. So I would say that before you start a company and before you get that idea, I'm going to go raise money, look at the market, because an investor will, the first question he or she will ask themselves is not, do they like you? I mean, there's that there, right? But the first thing they will say to themselves is this a market that can support, 3 or 4 public companies? And they will then work backwards from there, because ultimately an investor makes money when that company gets to, not 6 zeros, but 9, right? So
Right.
they're looking at how big can this thing be? And that's dictated by the market. And markets that are big, but that are crowded, not that sexy. They're expensive to penetrate. Markets that are big, but move slow, not that sexy because meaning slow, meaning like if you are buying Rolls Royces, the luxury high end market has a lot of money in it. But if people buy one Rolls or one Maserati or one McLaren in their lifetime, it's not a fast moving market. And so your investors are evaluating all of those things. So investors think about market risk first and then product risk. Can this, whatever you've built, really differentiate itself in this market? And then they're looking at team and traction risk. So do I trust that this team can execute? And so I would say before you start a company, before you do any of that, evaluate your idea from the perspective of someone who's going to invest with you and ride with you for 5 to 10 years. And do you have a big market? Do you have a product that can truly, truly differentiate and attract customers at a low cost? And do you have the team around you that increases the odds that this will execute and be successful?
Awesome. That's some great advice. I mean, we could talk for hours, you and I. So much to discuss. But it's interesting because I think there's obviously a big disparity between Black founders and white male founders, and how like the access to capital is just so striking in terms of what's available versus what's not. Like, how have you? What are some things that you would just say if you're a Black founder and you don't have this network, and you're trying, but you did twice as hard to get half as much. So you've done your right sizing, you built the right team, and like, are there doors that are easier to open? Are there paths to the way to get to funding that can be a little bit more strategic? Like, what do you think is some ways to help Black founders get that funding?
Authentically. I love that question. And here's where I will say something pretty on the edge is I think we all have access to capital. So here's a way to think about this differently. And I'm actually going to find some data. So the way that you capitalize a company is not only through venture capital. Like for some reason, we've gotten this idea, and you know what? People watch way too much Shark Tank.
Yeah.
They watch way too much Shark Tank. And we've gotten this idea that capital only comes from venture capital. I will tell you, I can name seven places to get capital. Angel investors, friends and family, right? Strategic customers and partners. So I raised almost $1 million from Intuit several years ago, bank, et cetera, crowdfunding, crowd lending, secondary markets, obviously IPOs and venture. But like at the end of the day, the larger market is actually the friends and family market. So I found some data, and this is a little bit dated, but in 2018, U.S. venture invested about $100 billion. That's a massive, massive number. My team did some research and found that the number of accredited investors in the U.S. that same year was about 12.4 million. Okay, that's people who have a net worth of above $1 million. So that's about 10% of all households in America. So that's $66 trillion in net worth in the U.S. in individuals. And so I say, why not go to focus on angel investors, people in your network, people who can write you a $25,000 check or even a $5,000 check. You know someone who knows someone who has the ability to help you fund your company. There are also massive funds that exist within corporations that are underutilized. Most corporations, if you're working for, a Microsoft or a Qualcomm or an Adobe or any of these big companies, they all have funds, internal funds that they don't utilize fully, that are places to go for capital, either as, you building something in exchange or you just raising money directly from them. So I fundamentally believe that we think that venture capital is this thing that is the end all be all. It is one pillar in the stack of where capital comes from. The best, easiest, most fruitful place to get capital is from people that you know. And it's going to come in smaller increments in the beginning, but that becomes the stepping stone for the venture capital, for that, private equity round. So I would encourage everyone to start to look at successful entrepreneurs, family offices, do your research on the people that you know, and start to ask different questions about their investment history and about their desire to put money into startups. And then when that doesn't work or it can't work, crowdfunding is obviously an opportunity. So I would say the capital is out there for whatever you want to do.
I love that answer, because I think that is the key here, is that there are so many other venues. I think it's oftentimes that we think we need the shiny toy, or we think we need to hit a home run when a single is sufficient. And, yes, it's harder to navigate that road if you take smaller increments, you take different rounds. But it doesn't matter how you get there. It's just get there if you can, which is
yes.
Yes. But it is very much get there. I mean, I've seen so much stuff, and I've met so many amazing founders, and I'm just like, there's 11 million ways to do something now. And
yes,
it doesn't have to be that one route. And I think, again, it's sort of like making tech sexy and cool by having these giant valuations. And it's the same, it's kind of like, again, doing it for the gram, where it's like, well, okay, who can raise $100 million? And it's like, do you need to raise $100 million? Would you be happy with a company that made $2 million a year and you pocketed $250? I'm sure you'd be happy, right? And I think, I think it's because we've had this sort of glamorization of what technology looks like,
yes,
as opposed to, where we are right now. And I think where we are right now is we're in the middle of a pandemic, and the ability for people to raise capital is going to be difficult. But it doesn't mean that there's a lack of ideas and lack of creativity, because guess what? You have time at home to think about the things that you want to build. And as a result
and don't believe the hype.
Don't believe the hype.
Don't to quote Chuck D, don't believe the hype. One of my mentees, extremely successful company, guy's brilliant. They're building something that will definitely change the way companies market. And it took them 5 years to go from idea and concept to their Series A. And they just closed a almost $6 million round. I also know a company, I was just invited to be part of a venture raise of a company that's worth, $500 million. It took 12 years. So part of what people also need to realize is go talk to other people who are in the game running startups, because the reality is you don't get there in 6 weeks or 6 months. Those stories are fables and fairy tales. In reality, a lot of founders slog it out and go through iterations, and they pivot and they put their own money in, and they raise $20,000 here. And in the reality of it, Laura, this from your own experiences, it takes a minute, and it takes a lot of creativity. And it's not, you walk into a room with a piece of paper and a napkin and you sneeze and someone gives you a $5 million check. That is a fable. That does not exist. That animal does not run in the wild at all. It doesn't. There are very, very few examples of it. There are more examples of people who live for their businesses, who are trying and creating and tweaking and pivoting and calibrating and learning along the way. That's more of the reality than this magical, mystical person who just drops in and gets $1 million. It's rare. It's really rare.
Well, it's like it took you 10 years to be an overnight success. And so, you know, I
Yes.
think, look, I'll give myself as a perfect example. So today, it's July, and it's July 20 whatever, in 2020, and it's the beginning of the 3% conference I've never actually spoken at live before, but I pre-recorded a
Okay.
session, and so it went up today, and I have gotten more DMs from senior leaders at companies today than I have gotten in months. Doesn't mean that I magically became this incredible speaker that everyone wanted to talk
Right.
to. Today, it took 10 years of running my agency, building relationships, now building a custom product that is what I'm talking about today on the conference. That took 10 years. It's not, the road is never easy. And I think, you know, the blessing of being a Black woman in business is that we are extremely resilient. And that is a skill that is necessary to sustain this wackadoodle world we live in, because it ain't for everybody. Like, you know, and so I will use the amazing Cookie Lion from Empire, since we're using quotes, and you know, the streets aren't for everybody. That's why they made sidewalks, and I feel like it's the same thing. You know, entrepreneurship isn't made for everybody. That's why it's called a job.
Yeah.
And like, if you want to roll in this universe of entrepreneurship, you really want to roll in for entrepreneurship. The good, the bad, and the scary.
Yes.
And if you do, come on board. It's gonna be wild. Yeah. So of course, like, promise, I could talk to you for hours, as I've said repeatedly on this episode. What's one thing that you'd want to tell 25-year-old Promise, looking back on all of it now?
You're doing great. You're doing great. You're doing great. Have more fun. Play more. Yeah. I mean, you know, I don't really have regrets, but when I was 25, I was a competitive ballroom dancer, and I was running companies and stuff. And I remember feeling like, God, this is like, I should be working more. And I'm so glad I didn't. I'm so glad that I took, you know, those 3-4 hours a night and just went and enjoyed something. And so the thing that I would say is, you know, this is I plan to live 100 years or 140. We'll see what happens. But having moments of joy and play and having a life that is interspersed with fun makes everything so much better. And so I would have told her, you're doing great, play more. Yeah, cool. That sounds right.
I love it. Yeah. I know, you're right. Yeah. Well, also competitive ballroom dancing, really, Promise? Like, what? Of course. Oh, Lord. Fine. Of course you, Lord have mercy. Okay. So my last question is, I've had folks on the show, especially during the time of COVID, and it's, do you have a give and or an ask of the audience or to the audience? And this can be anything. So it could be buy my book, or it could be a flash of wisdom, whatever you'd like.
I would say buy my book. I would love to get, you know, it's coming out soon, and there's a free chapter on our website at thegrowthwarrior.com, so you can go check it out and get a free chapter of the book. But I would say it's buy the book, buy 2 copies, buy one and give one, because, you know, one of the things that I saw during COVID is that, you know, a lot of people realized that having a single source of income, you've seen this, right? Like, having a single source of income can be dangerous. And so, you know, I'll quote, you know, Ray Dalio, who says, like, you need like 11 or 12 uncorrelated assets. And I would say, you know, entrepreneurship is not only a source of income, but it's also an asset class, like building companies, owning parts of companies. And so I want as many entrepreneurs in this world as possible. So my ask would be, dear listeners, buy 2 copies, buy one, read one, give one. So I think that would be beautiful.
Awesome. Oh my goodness. So promise, this is just the beginning of us having multiple chats. Because you're gonna adopt me. You don't even know that, but
you got it.
But also, I do love the realness of it and the truth of it all. And I think, you know, your very existence is inspiring to so many others. And the way that in the world that you walk in and the way that you walk in the world matters, because I think the more we normalize dope Black women who are like not doing it for the gram, not doing it for the faves on Instagram, but are just doing it to help and, you know, living fabulously, the better it will be for us all as we get in walk this journey of being an entrepreneur. So I thank you so very much for being a guest on the show. And we'll put all in the show notes about where you can pre-order the book.
Yes.
We know pre-orders are the thing that you need. And where they can find and connect with you. But it was an absolute delight to have you on the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you for what you do here and the platform that you create and the mentorship and teaching that you do in your career. I love it, and I love that we're connected, and I get to be also adopted by you when it comes to your fabulous apartment. things get better.
There's awesome. Tons of wine here. Awesome. And that is our show.